Happy Monday, Joe.
Happy Monday. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, had a
You look
good.
well.
Thank you, thank you. So do you. I had a
Thank you.
good, chill weekend. Enjoying MLK Day today.
Yeah, happy MLK Day. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. What did you do for the weekend?
We celebrated my niece's birthday yesterday, so for that reason, I'm out here in New Jersey. So
Nice.
yeah.
That'd be quite the fireplace for Brooklyn. But
Yes. Well, I also have a fireplace in Brooklyn, but I have not lit a fire yet this year. As you know, in New York City apartments with radiators, they get quite warm.
sounds fun.
Yeah, yeah. How about
Well,
yourself?
I was kind of out under the weather on Saturday, so I just actually read that book you'd recommended to me, the Man, the Brook, Capitalism. So that was a good read.
Yeah, what are your thoughts in the context of data engineering? So I touched on it a bit, and we were kind of talking about this before the show. It has a very pro labor bent, which I have no problem with. I think that's
What
great.
is the book about first?
So the book is about General Electric and basically Jack Welch's reign there. And I think he was treated as a real hero in the business world, especially in the 90s. In the 2000s, especially after 9/11, there started to be more skepticism. So I don't know if you got to this part in the book yet, but after 9/11, one of the things that happened is it turned out that GE had all these financial operations that were somewhat hidden, frankly, and they came to light because of the terrorist attacks. So like they were
No
very
pun intended.
exposed. Right, right. Yes, that's yeah. But they basically they had a lot of exposure on insurance, and so that's when a lot of the skepticism of GE's financial operations really started. I think there were other people even in the 90s who were kind of looking at balance sheets and realized that there was a lot of financial, like non-traditional industrial exposure going on. But it turned out that's how Welch was really driving profits, is kind of using the credit rating of GE to allow them to get way into finance with GE Capital.
Oh yeah, that was like the engine that it was. I think the thing that I thought was interesting is they could miraculously hit their quarterly number every single time. Um,
Yeah,
Bernie Madoff, that was a big red flag too, because I think one of the auditors who called out Madoff was like, "Yeah, how can he? How's this possible? Right? How do you just magically hit your number every time? Not just most of the time, but every single time. To me, that's a red flag. But anyway,
yeah,
it was an interesting one. But I think the other part of the book talked about sort of how Jack Welch was sort of single-handedly spearheaded the gutting of American labor and so forth. And so back in the day, it was sort of the golden age of capitalism, they called it, from the 50s to the late 70s. And, companies were more like families. And, Jack gets in and he's like, yeah, screw that. So immediately
yeah,
just lays off a bunch of people. And I mean, it's sort of, I think, I was thinking about this through the context of data engineering in the sense where companies, I think, took a very transactional approach
yeah,
to things. And so, and you fast forward to today, right? And it's all about adding value, ROI, and all these things. Where I think it, in one hand, it's great. On the other hand, in the case of Boeing, for example, right? When you had GE execs
yeah,
going there, what happened was Boeing was very much an engineering culture where you have to be, take the time to do things right, maybe be creative, but also be safe and do things very rigorously. And when the GE execs got in, it was all about cost savings, and safety sometimes aren't the best mix. You probably want to err on the side of safety if you're making planes, and that was represented to the 737 Max crashing twice because they wanted to cut corners. And I think that this is exemplified in software engineering and in technical fields, in the sense where it's, we see this manifested today. This is one of the things I talk about in my rants on data modeling, is that data modeling is actually really popular like as a legitimate field, back in the 80s through maybe the mid 90s. But then I think, and I was trying to line these timing up actually, and I was like, well, there might be something to this, in the sense where, if you move from the pendulum of maybe formal and rigorous to relaxed and fast, right? I mean, when you got into the fast side of the pendulum, around the time when a lot of companies started moving more towards everything's about the bottom line, and it didn't used to be
yeah,
that way, right? And you can see this exemplified in a lot of other companies. Like 3M was the other one, where
yeah.
another GE exec went there and did the same Welch playbook, and pretty much, it's a very creative organization, pretty much gutted the place, right? And all these, it's funny because all these GE execs went to these companies and they were sold out for scrap.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even with Boeing, that's the question, right? Because it seems like they've lost their basic ability to build a quality product. And that's why an airline will pay $100 million for a plane, because it's a quality product that will safely carry passengers. And so very, very basic capabilities.
I
And
don't
to your
need
point,
doors. It's fine. I don't
yeah,
need doors on my plane.
exactly. Who cares
What's
about
the
those
point of that?
bolts? Like, well,
Yeah.
no big deal. But let's just save a few bucks, like on labor and inspections and such. But I think that one thing we have to connect here is that, let me just preface this by saying that accounting and finance are very important, and I think you'll absolutely agree with that, Joe. I mean,
Hmm.
you're very much a business nerd, and you agree, like, it's important that you have cash flow and profits and other things. But a business is a lot more than just its finances, right? It's kind of like taking someone's blood pressure and saying, "Oh, this is a healthy person," but it turns out they're actually brain dead. Finance tells you something about the fundamental health of a company, but there are a lot of other things you need to understand, like whether they can fulfill their core business mission or not. And on the IT and data side, same thing. Like, if we're so obsessed with just the numbers and we cut the entire data team, then the business's ability to fulfill its core function, what it exists for as an organization, will be completely compromised.
Well, assuming
Or
the data team was part of a core function to begin with,
assuming, yeah,
right? I'm writing an
that's
article about
important.
this right now where
Yeah,
it's Potemkin data teams. I'll be probably releasing it later this week on my Substack. But it's sort of the notion that data is a weird one,
yeah,
right? I can make an argument that stuff that's core to your business. Well, you know what that is. It's something that's core to your business. Every business is different. Hopefully, you have something that's core to your business. If you don't, I don't know why you'd be in business, but that's a different question. But I think data teams are an interesting one because I feel like it's one of these. Part of it is core, um, mission induced, right? I'm gonna do data because it's a core functionality of my
right,
business, and this helps
right.
move the needle. But then you're able to probably attach an ROI to this. In other cases, I think it's FOMO induced, and I'm just gonna get a data team because if I don't do data, then obviously I'm gonna fall behind, which is the counter, the gaslighting that like a lot of people will do. Like, oh, if you're not doing AI or data, then you're obviously gonna be left behind. It's like, well, maybe not. I don't know. If I'm a logging company, sure, maybe. I think my core mission is making sure I can, provide logs and
Deliver
trees, and so
logs,
yes,
yeah, and keep your
that's my
workers
role.
safe. Hopefully, that's in there somewhere
Yes,
too.
yeah. Well, the gutting of labor is a different question, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting one. So yeah, but if data is core to your company and you gut it, then absolutely that's going to suck. That's a bad idea.
Well, let's talk more broadly about IT, because it's very much adjacent, right? Like, really, data
Oh,
and
very
IT
adjacent.
bleed into each other. So let's talk about one of our favorite airlines, Delta. How many times in the last year have you been kicked out of a transaction when you've gotten to checkout? So you go to checkout, you click, "Hey, I want to buy this ticket." How many times have you gotten there and then just been completely kicked out and had to start over?
I could say their site could be better. I mean, I've had things
I think
happen like
I
that.
think it's been about, I would count, about 15 times in 2023 that happened to me.
Okay, so that's IT.
That's IT,
Um,
but like, it's a core function of that business to be able to sell tickets to passengers, to support the finance of the company, like to bring money in. And so those are the kinds of things where if you don't invest in core functionality for data or IT, then you end up compromising your business in various ways. But
mhm.
yeah, to your point, there's this opposite problem where it's very easy to develop like Potemkin investments, where you're just chasing the crowd but not actually doing
Well, and
something useful.
for the audience, explain what Potemkin means exactly, because I think it's a bit of an intellectual term, du jour that.
Yeah, yeah, it comes out of Russian culture, as I understand it. So it's this
Yeah,
notion of, I don't even know the whole history, but basically there was this effort to convince the czar that certain villages were thriving, and so they would basically build a completely fake village with fake storefronts and fake, they'd have people come in as actors to pretend this village was
yeah,
thriving. But then if you went off the main street, or if you even looked at the backs of those houses, they weren't real houses. They were completely fake. It was
yeah,
all a facade. And you can certainly construct business facades, or even, we saw it in data science too, where it wasn't completely a facade. It just wasn't really supporting any core function. It was an effort to jump into advanced technology, but it wasn't clear how this functionality was actually going to contribute to the business. Kind of like your logging example. If during the data science craze you had decided that data science was somehow going to solve your logging problems, but you couldn't actually connect it to what you did with logs, you would end up spending, millions of dollars on technology and data science without helping the business at all.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Sorry, I have a lumberjacks on my mind for some reason.
Okay.
So
I mean, I'm the one who grew up in the Northwest, so
you did actually, yeah. Um, That's an interesting one. I mean, historically, IT's been thought of as a cost center, right?
right,
So I mean,
right,
that's because only because it has been in the past. I
yeah,
mean, it is basically a support function. But then again, as technology and data become more central to the the operations of companies, again of certain companies, I would say that not every company um, is a data company.
right.
I'm going to probably go counter to the narrative that we hear in our industry that every company needs to be a data company. I'm like, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. It'll obviously help, but you got to get a lot of stuff in place first.
Right. Right.
I mean, your core mission is what you really should be doing. I mean, C's Candy, for example, I don't know how data driven they are, but I don't really care either. I buy their chocolates because I like them and I want to get huge and obese. That's why I buy them. So,
Looks like it's
and
working out pretty well. So
working out really well. Yeah. Under this hoodie, I'm just kidding.
that's right.
But it's an interesting one. Yeah, but good book. Thanks for the recommendation. I think it because it's interesting. I mean, people like Jack Welch were definitely, I think, held up as a sort of the god of corporate America. And I think to this day still is revered. But I think a lot of the practices, as you dug underneath GE, for example, you
Yeah.
realize it was a total house of cards. Actually, it was functioning because of accounting and finance shenanigans. Like there was one example where they considered moving inventory from one warehouse to another as a sale, and they would
Yeah.
book it as a sale. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But it was held as a standard of American industry and so forth, and was delisted from the Dow, right? And
It's
now it's
wild.
basically a shell of its former self. So it just goes to show, I think, that the people that we idolize and the companies we idolize, there's probably always a different story behind what's going on.
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, in business, you can build something really great, and I think we've seen a lot of really great businesses built in the history of the United States and the history of modern corporations. But there's also a strong incentive to build a Potemkin business where it looks like it's functioning well, but there's really nothing behind the curtain, like or where you're dismantling your core functionality in order to pump out quick profits for a quarter.
I know a lot of companies. I'm not going to mention any,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, cool. Well, welcome to our Ask Us Anything edition. So Matt and I will continue ranting about
Ranting and not
random
answer your
topics unless you
questions.
ask us questions. Actually,
Yeah.
we let's you want to do a 180 real quick? You want to switch gears and answer a question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right. Or we keep talking. I don't know.
Yep.
I think it's Laisho. I think it's how you pronounce your name. Laisho. Hey, big fan of your data engineering book. How important do you see unit testing and data pipelines?
That is a good question. I think unit testing is very important. I think it remains kind of tricky in various ways. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Joe?
Um, I think you should unit test as much of your code as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to see the counter argument for not unit testing,
Yeah.
right? So it would more reverse the question, and it would be like, how unimportant do you see unit testing, not just in your data pipelines, but in any aspect of your where you're writing code? Um, let's take that side of the argument. Let's make this interesting. It's a good question. When would you throw unit testing out the window?
Yeah. I think generally it's a bad idea. I think it happens a lot in practice because of the complexity of certain types of unit testing. And so I think for a long time in the data warehouse world, the excuse was that the SQL was just too complicated to unit test. And you had a bunch of, subqueries inside of a CTE. And so how do you even unit test those? And that kind of surfaces the need even in SQL to write better refactorable code basically that can be broken down into units somehow so you can look at these individual portions and make sure they're producing the data that you want.
But are you writing SQL for your data pipelines?
That is a good question. I think often in practice that's exactly what happens. It depends on the data pipeline, right?
Yeah, that and probably some language like, if you're maybe .NET or Python or something too, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, but
Yes.
especially if you're dealing with languages like that, like you should definitely be unit testing. If you're making um like any functions, I think should have a suite of tests. So,
Yeah.
what do you think of test-driven development for data engineers?
That is a good question. So I think we need to link it probably to data contracts as well, although those remain controversial too. but the idea with I mean, there's also this notion of driven development where your data pipeline is built around what standards the data should conform to. And then if it doesn't conform, then you're going to start getting alerts basically pretty quickly and your data pipelines will fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of reminds me in software engineering, there's a notion of an interface, right? So that's
Yeah,
the contract when you're talking about writing
exactly.
a code. So yeah, I think that data contracts definitely fulfill that. Um, uh, I think that same desire, right? But you're talking about interoperability between
Right.
two different paradigms, not even systems, but basically you have software and application developers, and then um, things downstream, data stuff, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but I think unit testing is good. I would say it's super important, especially for upstream application developers, actually, because that sort of ensures that the code that runs and generates the data that you possibly rely on as a data engineer is in fact correct. And so I would make the argument that the extensibility of a data pipeline actually goes all the way back to the software.
Agree.
You know what I'm saying?
Agree.
Because that's when you have the chance to actually get it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a lot of reasons, you want a unit test too, just for the impact it'll have on users if the certain functions might say fail or produce side effects that are unintended. So I think for a variety of reasons, like everyone should unit test.
Yeah.
We should do it right now, Matt. I'm just kidding.
But I think there's also this organizational issue, which is very, very common in the data world, where the software development side doesn't really integrate at all with the data engineering team. And the attitude is if I commit something and I change the data that's going into Mongo, say I change its schema, it's really not my responsibility as a software engineer to inform data engineering. So they find out when their pipelines start failing because some new field randomly shows up. And this is very much, I would say, still the status quo right now, where data engineers are treated like janitors. They're just supposed to clean up whatever mess gets thrown their way. And ideally, in addition to just having formal testing processes and things, we would just have more communication between those teams too, and more common accountability to say, you need to make sure that you don't break data pipelines. And here's what the data pipeline expects. And if you're going to commit something that's going to break it, then you need to inform the downstream team so they can prepare by making changes and even having checks in your testing processes, just like you're saying, to make sure that you're not going to break those data pipelines.
Well, a controversial opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
data engineers, I think, exist precisely because there's the wall between software and data, right? I mean, in
Yeah.
an ideal world, there
Yeah.
should be no separation.
Yeah.
But there is, and I think this is an artifact of the legacy world of IT, where you had different functions handling data. Were really, especially as we move into the world of data products and data becomes more central to applications. I think the lines will blur, and they should, because the lobbying of data over the wall is a it's a. I think that's actually that should be an artifact of the old world.
Yeah.
Not of the old world like in Europe, but the old world of IT that as it's existed since like the 80s and 90s and 2000s, right? And I think that this is very much artificial constraints.
Yeah.
But it's an org chart thing too, where it's like, how do I set up my IT function? Well, or how do I set up my engineering team? Well, software engineers do software things, and data people do data things, and so forth. And so, but a lot of it, when you zoom out and you kind of look at why we actually do this, the answers are not as good as you would think. So I think they're kind of dumb answers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are a couple of threads here. So first of all, analytics kind of got to the party late, right? Like in corporate America, transactional databases to support applications were much more widespread early on. Data warehousing kind of came later, and it was always a downstream function. You always consumed from the transactional side, and then you were an observer, right? You were considered a passive observer of what was going on as opposed to a core function of the company, and your results weren't directly feeding back into production processes. And so you were just kind of treated as a second class process. Go observe, tell me something useful, but don't make too much noise, basically.
Yeah. I mean, Bill came up with the idea of the data warehouse, I think, when he was just writing an article for Computer World back in the 80s. It's like, he's like, well, why do we do it this way? Right. I mean, it's just,
Bill Inman, for those.
Yeah, Bill Inman, he
Built.
came, the father of data warehouse, and
Yeah.
ETL too. The whole process was his,
Yep.
doing as well. But I mean, but it's these weird insights that are just in some, when you kind of when you understand what actually happens with these decisions, they're like super random. Like
Right.
he very well may not have come up with that idea either. Somebody else probably would have. I mean, because it's like analytics is becoming more into the fray, and had been. I mean, Teradata had been around for a long time, but
Yep.
um, but it's but the notion of just pegging your transactional system, I mean, that for analytical queries, I mean, that was kind of the norm back in the day. And these
Yeah.
systems are like frail. I mean, you could like breathe on them, they'd probably like keel over. So something needed to happen. I've got another question here. Let's keep it on the when we're talking about systems and testing before we get
Yeah.
too off the rails and you have to meander back. Jose, what's up, man? Related to the discussion of unit testing, how would you balance resources between unit systems integration and or a QC org? I guess it's quality control org. QC stands for. How would you look at an investment of software versus people? A lot to unpack here, Matt. Go for it.
I think so. There's been to some extent a movement against quality assurance. So QA, the difference, or QC, depending on your terminology, is where you have humans testing software. And so, before you're ready to deploy a change to an API, you'll have humans who go test various functionality on a test version of the website where the API is sitting behind the scenes, and they kind of are aware of what changes have been made to that API. And so they try to probe to look for potential problems that will appear in the website behavior due to those changes. And the tendency in going to continuous integration, continuous deployment, where we do more and more testing, and testing is mandatory, and testing has to happen before an actual commit that's ready to go into production, there's often been this assumption, well, we don't need QA or we don't need QC anymore because all this stuff is automated. I think there's room for both. I think when you have continuous integration and continuous testing and unit testing, you probably don't need as much human interaction to test things. But there are still a lot of things that humans will surface that you're not going to surface through automation. You'll just get weird behaviors in the website because of almost emergent behavior, right? You make some obscure API change, and then it turns out it interacts with some front-end JavaScript code in an unintended way that's not caught by any test, but a person clicks on it and immediately something blows up, right? And I think there are things similar in the data world where you both need unit testing, automated testing to check the data and make sure it conforms, but also people looking at the reports to say, hey, why are my numbers way, way off? Let's figure out what's going on here. That's kind of the QC side as I see it. I don't know. What do you think?
QC is an interesting one. I mean, at a few startups I've been at and a few other companies, I mean, they had QC teams. And I think as software engineers, we always question, like, what was the point?
Right.
Right. Because we could write a lot of tests and we could, do a CI/CD. So I think from a functional standpoint, that we capture a lot of this stuff, that you're trying to get, I guess, get attention to through tests. Now, the other question is, I kind of want to reframe QC as more being a UX testing, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, if you go to what's the desired user experience you're trying to achieve?
Yes.
I think that's more of something where we need to pay attention to. And again, this is also on software. This is maybe also on the quote data end of things. But what's the UX of stuff? I think that's maybe
dashboards,
more what you need to pay attention to. Because I mean, you understand how permutations work, I think, and combinations. It's like trying to find edge cases is very much a combinatorial exercise. You will never find all of them, but do you need to? I don't know. So what's the optimum user experience? I would say is more of how I would frame the QC question. I think QC is sort of a relic of kind of the assembly line age. Right. Now we're trying to, again, in engineering, we always try and shoehorn in manufacturing and supply chain type stuff into engineering for whatever reason. It's kind of funny. But I don't know. That's how you look at it. Now, the second part of the question, how do you look at investment of software versus people? I think that's an interesting one. I think that, I don't know. I mean, my opinion is like, you should try and automate as much as you can. I don't know what the counter argument of this is. Because then you run into the mythical man month scenario, which is
explain that real quick. Yeah.
So mythical man month, I think it was a book by was Frederick Brooks or something like that. It came out in the 60s or 70s or something, 70s, I think it was. Anyway, but it described the phenomena where throwing more people at a late software project actually makes it more late.
Right.
And the reason is because we tend to think of So throwing more people at a problem is good when you have problems that are linearly scalable, right? And it's more of sequential type work. So an assembly line is very much like that, where if you throw more bodies at an assembly line, you will get more output because it's sequential work. One thing is done and it hands off to another. Software is not like this. Software is very much non-sequential. There's always non-linearities in this type of work, and so throwing more people at the problem actually makes it worse. And so that's why I would say that if you just focus on making your software better, possibly through automation, I think that's how I would approach that question of looking at the investment of software versus people.
Well, I think it's important to point out here that the DevOps philosophy, which even in data engineering is kind of what we're building on in this context, it's really about automation and humans. So one of the major changes with CI/CD, with continuous integration and continuous delivery, is that software engineers became more directly responsible for the quality of their code, writing their own tests and making sure that everything passed muster, and then doing pull requests and checking each other's code. And in the past, there'd been this assumption, okay, I'm just going to write the code and then I'll hand it off to QA to take care of my mess. And then eventually they'll get back to me and then I'll work on debugging. And so it's not simply an either or automation versus humans. It's building automation that leverages people who are writing the code as well as possible. Okay, so here's random aside here, and this is related to a newsletter that you sent out that I read this morning. How do you think Copilot type apps, so using
I was going to make
tools,
a joke about this.
Well, it's not just a joke, right? How do you think that's going to affect continuous integration, continuous delivery, unit testing, QA, all of these things that we've just been talking about?
I mean, to an extreme, what you have are just AI agents that just that are your software engineering team, I guess. And so the feedback loops of that interaction, I would be thrilled to see. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to go away.
Right.
Copilot's not going away. It's only going to get more popular and similar tools like that. So I'd say learn to embrace them in your workflows as much as you can. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I don't know. I mean, it's like I said in the newsletter, Copilot's a gateway drug for a lot of companies into AI because a lot of developers I talk to, well, it's mixed. Either they love Copilot or they hate it. I don't think there's much of a there's not a middle ground where they sort of tolerate it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that we'll evolve our workflows to better accommodate these tools, because one thing you find right away is that something like Copilot, ChatGPT will generate code that kind of gets you partway there, but generally this code has some errors. Almost every time I've tried it, there's some problem with the code.
Yep.
And it's an iterative process. For now, it's very human intensive to like have it generate code, run the code, test the code, and then say, all right, these are the errors I'm getting. Often people will feed those back in as another prompt in the chat to say, hey, I'm getting this error. And then the tool will suggest, oh, well, maybe you can fix this line of code. Here's the corrected code. And then you try it again. And so presumably we need to integrate that process both with humans and with automated testing tools and other things over time.
I mean, the CEO of Shipyard had a good article about recently. He was using Copilot to write the code like 100%. He was not going to write code himself. It was a test. So he was like just getting better at prompting. I think it came down to the types of prompts you're using that made the code better or worse. And so that's what he learned. But it was an interesting thought experiment, or maybe he was really crap at writing code and just said, oh, I'm going to use this as a test. I don't know. I'm just joking. But
so. I mean, there are so many questions raised for us that maybe we weren't even thinking about a year ago, right? Or a year and a half ago. Like none of this was really on our radar for the most part.
Happens. Yeah. Obviously, you got more questions here. I'm gonna go through these pretty quick because we get the half-hour mark. That's what happens when we get Matt and I on the show.
I know
we can talk a lot,
nonstop.
I mean, so for the audience, since we're talking, we started the show a few years ago because Matt and I just wanted to capture the conversations that we had, because this is what Matt and I always talk about. We would talk for hours just about stuff like this. This is literally a conversation we'd have. We're hella nerds. So we decided to record it, and here you all are now listening to us reenact our. Then we got guests on the show. That kind of changed things. But anyway, let me see. Another question for data contracts. So recommended way tools interface for contract work. Examples, eBay open source, sort of Data Hub. Some more overkill for consulting. I'm not sure about this last part. That's not really a question. But the recommended tools or interface for data contract work. what is it? I know there's like a data contract standard out there by who is it? Is it Andrew Jones or John Pierre or something like that? Anyway, I can look it up and put it in the notes. But anyway, there's that. Let me see what this is real quick. Data contract.
Okay, and I know
Gable's working on something with Chad Sanderson.
I was going to say Chad is a big advocate and has a
There's
lot
the
of
open
very
data
specific
contract
ideas.
standard. So just go look that up, right? But yeah, Chad's working on something dope over at Gable. Full disclosure, I'm also an investor in the company, but yeah. So, I mean, I put my money where my mouth is.
So
yeah.
I mean, I think Chad's approach in particular tends to be oriented more towards streaming, right? So he approaches he approaches contracts as you would with service-based software development, where you're kind of analyzing individual elements of data coming in and checking them as they come in before they can even be processed into the stream. Am I understanding that correctly?
I mean, it's heavily based on Kafka. Yeah. So
yeah. Whereas, I mean, honestly, tools like DBT kind of build this in. I don't know if it even really calls it data contracts, but it has testing
Jean-Georges
tools.
Pierre was the other one. Yeah. I'm friends with the dude. I didn't want to mispronounce his name and call him like George St. Pierre or something like that. So
it would be a bad look, Joe. That would be a bad look, even for nerds like us. Yes.
George St. Pierre is actually a pretty good MMA fighter. Anyway.
Okay. But regarding, I mean, there's that kind of stream-based approach, and then even tools like DBT have integrated testing, where as part of your flow, your model, you can require
model
a test,
contracts.
and so that's in a sense a contract. I don't know if they probably call it that now, just because
I think it's model contract. Yeah, and they do have it in the. I can't remember if it's in the paid or free version, but anyway, yeah. I mean, you're still more of this stuff. I mean, I consider this sort of the equivalent of kind of a modern form of testing, right? I mean, so I mean, but who was it? Andy Petrella had this idea way back in the day. Data-driven observability first testing or something like that. What did he call it? It was the Dodd framework. Yeah. Anyway,
well, I'm trying to remember the story he was telling me, but I think a lot of his experience in this and a lot of his ideas came out of working with basically highly sensitive, like intelligence and military data, where everything was observed, right? So anything you access, it's monitored, because you can't have people accessing highly sensitive data without you knowing about it. And obviously, we've seen when you don't have those controls in place, what happens. We've had a number of leaks in the United States partially linked to this, where there weren't proper controls. But yeah, I think his idea was to extend that process to say, well, corporate data should be monitored too, and we should know exactly what happens to it, who accesses it, how it's processed, what its characteristics are.
I mean, good luck with that in ChatGPT. But I think what was it? 40% of workers are putting corporate data in ChatGPT or using it for their work now.
Although this is nothing new. Like, have you ever seen, back, say 5 years ago, did you ever see coworkers paste data into JSON parsers? And you're like, wait, stop. That's sensitive data. Yep. You don't know what, is this like a trusted JSON parser online you're using? It's funny how people don't think about this stuff. It's, yeah.
Well, I mean, you can take, if something makes your job easier, right? You can think about that first. Yeah. It's like, I don't know. What else we got here? Let me see. Superman. I swear this is my kid trolling me, but it's not. Thoughts on the state of open source? Well, he's trolled us before on the show.
Yes, I didn't even realize this.
Yeah. Okay. He's Milo, if you're watching the show, turn it off. Thoughts on the state of open source software and data? How does it compare to paid license software? Let's make this a pretty quick answer. I think we have a pretty canned response to this, but all right, build versus buy. Open source. Open source versus paid. What do you think?
So in general, I generally lean toward buying software unless it's core to your business functionality. And so most data engineering teams should not be building a lot of things from scratch unless they have a very specific application that's not satisfied by some outside product. So the conversation with Alex, actually, from Red Panda, we were talking about this, how Red Panda is a streaming platform, high-performance streaming platform, and they invest a lot of money and effort into their own platform, but things that aren't in that core functionality, they pay for. And they spend a lot of money on software and services for that reason, even though they're a data company, because if it's not their core streaming platform, then why invest in it?
Mm-hmm. I would say just look at the Look at the licensing too of open source software. I think it's an interesting one where I feel like open source software is sort of at this weird inflection point where
Yeah.
I think people are having second thoughts about the business model of open source.
Yes, agree.
I mean, this is happening right now.
Like HashiCorp, like Red Hat, for example, which is now owned by IBM, and
Snowplow changed their
presumably
licensing
that's
as well,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
so I think it works when it works, and it doesn't work when it doesn't work. I would say like find if it's sponsored by a foundation, maybe look at that. But I would I don't know. I think it's also look at the management costs
yes,
of
yeah,
running open source software because it's open source. That's great, except you get to manage it. There's some pros and cons of this. So as I always say, if you're going to use open source, I guess just evaluate what are the opportunity costs, what are the costs, and go from there. It's pretty simple.
yeah.
I said we'd have a quick answer on this, and we did. So hey, look at that. Moving on, Daniel Taylor. Uh, Thoughts on how skill sets will change as we spend less time on the plumbing and more time with data systems that just work as intended / needed.
I mean, I'd like to see data engineers spending more time on more abstract pieces that would really add a lot of value. There's that word again, but things like unit testing, right? So if you're not fiddling with the guts of Hadoop, then hopefully you can spend more time thinking about the quality of your data, testing it, making sure it's secure, these kinds of like higher order functions that are actually really, really key.
Hmm. Yeah, like I said in my newsletter, I think everything's going to become more enterprisey, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you're going to
Yeah.
be able to focus on things that I think add more quote value versus low level plumbing. Now, if low level plumbing is the thing that adds value, and you're doing
Right.
it for a very specific reason,
Your red panda say.
yeah, you're kind of like you have to differentiate your way
Yeah,
by doing low level
exactly.
stuff, right? Or you're operating at, I mean, shit, if you're writing assembly language, I mean, because you have to,
Writing
right?
drivers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's to me that's low level plumbing that's necessary. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward answer, I think. But I think skill sets, how will skill sets change? I think that's maybe more the core of the question. Skill sets will need to evolve. As I think Edwards were fond of saying, that engineers are going to work more closely with quote the business. This is something that actually Sol Rashidi brought up, and I think sort of the offense and defense playbook.
Yeah.
Right, she's I think that's right. She introduced me that, and something where I think we always talked about, but they didn't really put a name on it. I like this though, where it's the notion that we tend to focus on, as engineers, focusing on the defense side, which is building robust systems and infrastructure, because we're engineers, we like to engineer stuff, right? But the offense part is about the business value part of the equation, right? So it's almost a yin and yang of the two. But I think you got to look at both. I mean, I think it goes without saying you should have robust systems. Do you want non-robust systems or things that like fall apart all the time? I'd
But
love
you
to hear.
also want to answer a question like, how is this helping the business, to what you were saying earlier, right? How is this helping my operations, say? How is this helping my inventory management or forecasting? Or how is it helping me to use resources more efficiently or grow? Those are the kinds of questions that CEOs want to be able to answer when you talk to them about what you're building with data.
Yep. Or maybe they don't. I don't know.
Maybe not if you're Jack Welch. I mean,
How many people are going to fire today? Um, see, Evo, what's up, dude? We're betting big on AI assisted legacy code migration to space. We'll announce it at Skid. I think I know what he's talking about. This will be dope. Yeah, looking forward to seeing it at Switzerland too, Evo. For people who don't know what Skid is, Skiers in Data. It's in Verbier, Switzerland. Was it March 1st? I think it is, or
I
that
think
weekend.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you happen to be interested in that combination of skiers and data in Switzerland, join Matt and me and Evo and Chris Tapp and everybody else for a great time.
And
Or
Sol,
don't.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
she has a comment here. Thanks for the shout out. The offensive is the sexiest of the two for sure, and the business gravitates there naturally without realizing a play isn't one without defense either.
Yep. Agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She has a question too. A QU question. Do data engineers get the chance to do both in reality?
I think it depends a lot
Mhm.
on the organization and the skills of the human skills of those data engineers. So ideally, technical skills are a baseline. Not everyone has the human skills to communicate with the business side of the house and listen to what stakeholders need and communicate with about how they can serve stakeholders in various ways.
Do you think they should do these in reality?
I think it's a good idea. What do you think?
The one thing I would wish this to be the case. I think in some companies that there's certain engineers that I think do this.
Yeah.
I can't say universally this is true though, but I think part of it is the nature of how engineers are expected to communicate with the business, i.e., they're not. So,
Yeah.
right. I
Stay in
think
your
that's
dark corner. Let the head of the department communicate, but you
yeah.
should keep your
Stay in
mouth
the
shut.
closet. Actually, I'm just gonna throw a pizza under the door
Yeah.
for you, and you can gobble that up like some sort of a troll or something. No, I mean I think it's just the reality of it. So I think that part of this, the upskilling, the change in skills that we talked about. I think part of that is going to be again learning how to work with a business, learning how to communicate. I think this is my goal is that we don't talk about data at some point and we just focus on business functions. I talk about this repeatedly. And I think this is sort of where it's going, right? Because as tools become more abstracted, as things are probably done more by AI agents in the background, this is the opportunity to solve fundamental problems and learn to communicate with the business. But I have a lot of hopes and aspirations, and they never seem to materialize. So I don't know. But do they get a chance to do it both in reality today? I would say that's a very mixed answer.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And it depends on the organization, right? Like at Google, there are so many different tiers of engineers, down to those working just on disk clusters, for example, all the way up to those who are basically working with the product team to decide what features to deliver. And so if you're just working on some really deep technical problem, then you probably don't need to communicate with the business day to day. If you're right in the midst of product, then obviously you do.
Yep. By the way, all three of us, Sol, Matt, and I will be out of Day-to-Day Texas. So,
Yes.
and Skid as well. So, anyway, good question. What are the questions we got here? I can't pronounce your first name. I'm so sorry. I'm going to butcher it. With all the abstraction of the hard stuff and data tools, do you think dimensional modeling will get to the point where you just drag and drop in a GUI over object store data, or is it already happening? No, I don't think that. I don't think that data modeling is a drag and drop exercise. Right. So I think that if you, but let's take this. Let's take this as maybe an example. Let's say that okay, this is possible. I would still say that engineers, even if this was possible, I'd say that data engineers and engineers and data modelers, they still want to tinker with stuff, right? Data modelers, the ones that I've met, and we're talking hardcore ones like Steve Hoberman and so forth. I mean, it's very much a thinking person's sport. It almost borders on philosophy in some ways. And so I'm not going to drag and drop philosophy. It's a weird thing. And then engineers want to write code, right? So any chance you get, it's like you want to clank in your keyboard and pretend you're doing stuff, even if you aren't, or do stuff. But I think dimensional modeling is an interesting one. I think if you were to say in general data modeling as a drag and drop exercise, I think that's probably not a thing. But let's distinguish between tools though, that are data modeling tools, right? So SQL DBM is one of them, wonderful tool. But in that case, you're more defining your entities and the relationships between them, or the facts and dimensions. And this is again, as a thinking person's sport, because you have to think about how the objects in your business, right, the entities in your business relate to each other, and how do business business rules and vocabulary and information flows impact your model, right, and the way it's reflected in data. So I don't think it's as simple as just having a drag and drop interface. I mean,
so remind us, Joe, of the three tiers of data modeling. I think these definitions are pretty common, and I think there's a certain definition that you've embraced for like three different levels of data modeling.
Well, I mean, traditionally it's been called conceptual, logical, and physical modeling, right? And so conceptual is the high level thinking of the processes, the vocabulary, the business rules, information flows, and so forth, and really how those translate into concepts, i.e. conceptual. And logical is really taking sort of the intermediate layer between that and the physical implementation of that model into a sort of a system, right? So logical starts kind of refining that a bit, but it's not the physical implementation yet. Then
right,
physical is where you do it. But I was talking to Steve Hoburn the other day. We were doing a podcast, and he actually called that align, refine, and design.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because he's thinking, because I think he was trying to teach people conceptual modeling. He's like, well, That's interesting, except I think in a lot of cases that throws people off because conceptual seems very wishy-washy and very, as I said, philosophical, right? Like you're getting into areas that are probably going to bore people or scare them off. And so I think he had a really good point where a line is conceptual, refine is a logical, and design is a physical. And again, you got to remember, Steve's one of the OGs of data modeling. I mean, he's literally one of the first people to be talking about it and teaching people about it. So I thought it would every couple of years he sort of redefines what he how he approaches data modeling. I thought that was a really interesting way of describing it, and I like what he's going for, where you kind of align the concepts at a high level, and you refine them, and you design the system there. And I think that was really good. But again, the traditional way of approaching it, it's conceptual, logical, and physical, right? So.
But I think the bigger point from my perspective, and you have much stronger opinions on this, understandably, but tools are great, right? They're meant to facilitate thinking and facilitate the actual technical process of design. But if you have no training in data modeling, the tool is not going to train you, right? It's
Makes it
just
worse,
like,
actually.
yeah, it's just like using a tool like Adobe Premiere or Photoshop or something. If you just go in there and hack around, you're not going to get very good results. Like, you need training on those tools, and you need training on general concepts of image processing or video processing in order to produce a good output. The same thing with data modeling. You need to understand the business. You need training in how data models should work, what the core concepts are, and so on. And I think that's what's really been lacking in the last several years. The tools got so easy that we thought we really could throw out that core training, conceptualization, and thinking, and that's not the case, I think.
Yeah, and I take a lot of inspiration from Lean, for example, right? And there's the notion of learning to see business processes. I think that's helped me a lot, right? Just understanding how you can just identify flows almost automatically after a point. It becomes very intuitive and bottlenecks. And I think this is one of the skills of data modeling where I think hopefully that goes, because it's, in a sense, you're also business modeling, right?
Right.
I mean, that's essentially what you're trying to do. And you're trying to map it into something that can be represented in data on a computer system. I mean, that's how William Kent described it in Data and Reality back even in 1978 in the book, right? So at that time, computers were very rudimentary, and people were having to figure out the philosophical consequences of how do you take reality and abstract it into a computer. But this is no different than where we are today. You're still observing the reality of your situation and trying to model that, in some sort of a system. And I don't think that ever goes away until AI takes it over, maybe. But yeah, it's an interesting one. It's kind of a follow-up question here from a LinkedIn user. I wonder who this is. This is I don't know, somebody. I'm trying to figure out. Sometimes StreamYard will call you LinkedIn user, and actually half these questions aren't showing up. Anyway, I'll get to the point here. I'm with you on modeling being a thoughtful philosophical work, but how much does that work really need to vary across companies? What percentage of objects and entities and relationships are shared across companies of the same quote type? I'd say 80%. That's what he says. That's what he said. So
it's funny. Yeah, I mean, we were just on a call like not too long ago, and just within a single company, there was a lot of inconsistency, and we see that a lot. So I don't know. I'd push back on this a bit, just saying, even within a single company, we often see a lot of inconsistency in data models for different parts of the organization. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple of threads to this. First, I would like to point out that there's a notion of data model patterns, right? So back in the day, at the late early 2000s, maybe in the late 90s, it was Lev Silverstein came up with the data model resource books. They're 3 volumes of them. I think they total 2,000 pages, and they're amazing. But what he described back then, I think still holds, where there are patterns that you can use to represent most businesses. And these patterns hold across businesses. So you take an example of a retailer. You're not going to come up, if you're a retailer, your job is to get products and sell them to customers through some sort of a front. You could be an e-commerce company. You could be a brick and mortar retailer. That is the business model. You're taking items and you're marking them up and selling them. That's literally how it goes. So the models that you use to describe a retailer are pretty universal, right? You have the notion of a product, you have a notion of an order, you have a notion of a customer. So tell me in a universe where that changes, right? So I would say this 80% number is probably I would say argumentatively correct. Where there's a sharing of these objects and entities and relationships across companies, absolutely, yeah. The nuance, though, the last 20% is where you have to figure out the nuance of your own company. Even when you read these data model resource books, for example, it's like, they definitely point out that, yes, these are good. This will get you to the 50% mark. Save you a ton of time, though. right, in terms of coming up with your data models. But then you still have the other 50 to 25% to figure out, and that's usually the hardest stretch. That's
Agree.
where the hill gets steep, and
Yep.
you got to
Yep.
put in the work. But that's because every business is going to be different. Because if you took the data model resource book and just made your business that way, and that's all you had, I would say you have a very undifferentiated business, and there's nothing interesting about it.
Well, and there are a lot of details that have to be worked out both on the business process side and the data model side. So, for example, master data management. How big a struggle is master data management for companies that deal with customers? It's a really big struggle because even basic questions like how you define a customer are actually really hard to answer in a consistent way across an entire business.
This is from Abi, by the way. What's up? A good question. No, that's just it, right? So MDM is definitely a classic example of that. And we're going to trigger Soul. She used to be a MD, or I think IBM's like a MDM lead or something. So and Scott Taylor. So
yes, he has opinions and puppets too.
Yeah, and Malcolm Hawker and all of our other MDM friends. But turns out it's still pretty hard to do. I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, so I don't know. It's an interesting one. I don't think these problems go away because at the end of the day, and I've been thinking a lot about this with respect to Conway's law and how this impacts data models. So Conway's law basically says that you're going to design systems and architecture according to the way that your company communicates.
Yep.
But then I was thinking of a corollary to this where you're going to design your data models according to the infrastructure that you have, right? But then also the other constraint is Conway's law, which means that you're going to also design data models according to your organization. So it's almost a transitive property in that sense, where the data model is subject to the constraints of both the organization and the architecture. Because ultimately your data model needs to be put somewhere, and depending on the type of architecture you have, unless you're starting greenfield, you're going to have to shoehorn that in. So, right. So something I've been thinking a lot about. But that is a natural constraint. We'd love to live in this world where we can come up with these beautiful data models, but the reality is you are subject to physical limitations in a lot of cases. But you need to do the best to map that conceptual, or I guess the, whatever Steve called it. But anyway, there's a lot of constraints. We don't live in a perfect world. Let me see. What other questions do we have before I go off on a rant for the next 5 hours? Derek Schmidt, very long question here. How would you guys architect a reporting layer, Power BI, Tableau, et cetera, to read data from a central data warehouse? It seems that once data is liberated and available in the enterprise, that this is the bottleneck and difficult to scale. Either you kill the warehouse with queries, you make copies of the data, and neither is a good solution. Holy cow, Matt. I don't know if this guy was eavesdropping on our conversation we were having earlier this morning, but this is exactly the conversation we were having this morning.
Yes.
Some variation of it. What do you think about this?
That is a good question. And I mean, I think 2023 for users of Snowflake kind of turned into a reckoning on costs, because costs had started to explode for many companies. And there was a lot of public discussion of this, and it's partially for this reason. How do you manage costs when you have so many people running the same queries and hitting your data warehouse over and over again? And often when you analyze these queries, you find that they're just asking the same questions over and over and over again. So how do you put some layer in front of that to really reduce the burden on those core systems? Or, Snowflake will scale up as much as you want. It just gets very expensive, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I think the notion is that the data warehouse, the central data warehouse, is going to provide you the raw ingredients for your Power BI or Tableau. But as we were talking about this morning, people will just take the data from Tableau and kind of do whatever the heck they want to do with it. Power BI, you can do that as well. DAX is pretty awesome. And what happens? Well, you sort of run into a query sprawl, report sprawl, and so. I don't know of a good solution to this. I would say this is an organizational issue. You could certainly, maybe if there was a way that you could turn off, ad hoc transformations, I would say that'd be awesome. I don't know how that works in these tools or what your IT policy is, and but maybe that's something to look at. Either you kill the warehouse of queries and just reading back, you kill it, or make copies of the data, and neither is a good solution. Nope, neither is a good solution. But the inevitable thing is people find workarounds.
Yes.
Right. I mean, this is why Excel is super popular. That people use Excel because they can't, because the other solution isn't viable to them, or they don't have a solution to it, so they use Excel, right? And I would say that the same thing goes with Power BI. Analysts will try and answer questions as quickly as they can and as best they can. So if your data warehouse isn't providing that, then what do you think people are going to do? Wait.
Yeah. And I think
So
another solution we've seen a lot is like various types of BI query layers where you have a layer that's either in memory or just on SSDs that pre-ingests some data or at least caches it so that the analytics queries just hit that layer and it's much more efficient for small queries if the queries are reasonably small.
yeah,
And we've also seen the edge computing solution, right? Like DuckDB, and I think probably other vendors will come out along those lines where you kind of move some of that late stage computing, meaning ad hoc analytics, to a local machine because local machines actually have quite a bit of power now. And so you do a remote query, pull the subset of data that you need, bring it locally, and then you can query locally to your heart's content without affecting the backend systems.
yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of Mother Duck, and I think it'd be pretty
Yeah.
interesting if Mother Duck had partnered with say Power BI or Tableau to
Yes.
integrate that into using Wasm. Just
Right.
have that in the browser. Andy Mott, what's up, dude? Andy Mott's my the guy I love to hate. Just kidding. He says there are semantic layers that solve for a lot of reporting, like
Yeah.
queries, not
Yeah.
completely. Yeah, completely agree. Yep, we'll have to have semantic layers. I think it's a good call out.
Although some semantic layers just push down to Snowflake, so it depends on your particular solution.
From the
But
cost
some,
angle, it's still going to
yeah,
be a thing, right?
yeah, yeah, or some do it in a
Or use
separate system.
Starburst. I think
Yeah,
that's good.
it's
It's
true.
good use. Yeah, good to see Andy. He says, "Hello." Yep. Hi. Um, we did a debate last year, or yeah, it was pretty fun. He's a fun dude. This is from Jason Taylor, aka LinkedIn user. What are our thoughts on how the broader workforce embraces data and becomes more capable with data? Python to some end becoming the new Excel.
That's a good question. Python skills are still tricky because there is a large contingent that has Python skills, but you still have a huge swath of the kind of business workforce that can do Excel and maybe do Tableau and some SQL, but not really Python yet. So I don't know. Is it desirable to kind of retrain everyone to do Python, or is that not realistic?
I don't know. Well, Python's in Excel now.
That's true. Yeah.
So I would love to see the usage of that, and I think that'll
Yeah.
maybe answer the question. I mean,
Yeah.
it's always this. The thing that always pissed me off though is this whole everyone needs to code phenomenon,
Right.
right?
Right.
I think that was popular. I think I wrote an article back in
Yeah.
2012 or 2013 about this. I think it called
Yeah.
Code Week, but it was WEAK. Because I think Obama is trying to push, everyone needs to learn to code.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think everyone needs to learn to code. I think people need to learn how to think.
Right.
So that'll help you. Just being able to write, a hello world in Python isn't, I think, going to get you that far in life. Knowing how to think will. So I think start there. Code is simply a way of translating your thoughts into some sort of a program, right? But you got to understand like how to think through a problem first. Just writing code without that capability, I think you're as Charlie Munger put it, you're sort of a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. That's how he put it. So, or woman. But I think the description still holds, right? You're intentionally setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I think with Obama's efforts and other efforts to train more people to code, they do make a lot of sense. But just because you have a certain sector that's very high paying, that doesn't mean that that's an appropriate thing for everyone to be doing. And in fact, most business leaders probably shouldn't be writing their own code. They should be delegating that to someone else.
Yeah, actually, Jason has a follow-up question. We can go over time now. We don't have anything else to do. Actually, let me check my calendar and make sure don't have any appointments after this. We're good, man. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Fine. Python aside, that's from Jason. Curious how the workforce becomes more data capable. Smiley face.
Yeah, and even basic data and statistical literacy being more widespread, I think, would be a positive thing. I mean, do we just need more training, and maybe training that's not focused on code? I think sometimes getting too deep into writing code can actually distract from what you're trying to teach people. I know plenty of people who can program with Python but don't really get statistics at all.
Hey, we got to get Jordan Morrow on the show.
Yeah,
He's
I
the
think so.
godfather of data literacy, and we hang out quite a bit. Actually, get lunch this Friday. So I'll come back about 500 pounds heavier. But we talk a lot about this actually, data literacy. And I think that's one of the ingredients to making this work. But coupling that with business literacy, I think the criticism of data literacy is only focuses on data,
right?
But I think he's onto something, and he doesn't take a technical approach to this. I think that's part of it. But data capable, I think it means being data aware first,
right?
And most people still are not that aware of data. I mean, if you were to ask people my thing is like ask somebody to calculate an average.
Right.
Or
what is
the best question would be, okay, so which one do I use?
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing I noticed is you can tell who's proficient in Excel. For example, if they use the average function, or if they go and just like take the sum and divide it by the number of things in that the count. So, and I saw somebody actually like physically count the numbers and then hard code that number in.
That I imagine
in the yeah, it was like
pretty widespread actually
in the numerator. Yeah, I was like, okay, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
So it's cool. I mean, I showed them the average function. I'm like, oh my god, that's so cool. It's like, yeah. But that's good. I mean, they learn, and that is what it is. Export all that data plumbing results into Excel sheets. You joke, but this is actually the standard request. I think.
Yeah.
I noticed this in most of the BI tools. The request is, well, how can I export that to Excel? So yeah, it's a fun world we live in. See Val, for business users, you need to keep it simple. No code for them. Leave them to do what they do. Abstract the code. Yeah, totally agree. Jess, what's up? Sure wouldn't hurt for more of us to be Excel literate. Wouldn't hurt at all. Excel's pretty dope. I like it all the time. I mean, I use spreadsheets every day for various things. I have a spreadsheet where I track every workout I've ever done, going back to like
pretty nerdy.
2013, I think.
And all the times you've gotten sick, I think, as well. Is that correct?
I do. I keep track of that in a spreadsheet. Yeah. Yeah. Everything's in there. Everything. Yeah. Blood pressure. I'm weird.
Nice. No, it's all those metrics. Yeah.
Val said he's seen somebody use a calculator and entered the values into Excel. That's special.
Wait. Sorry, they were using a hand calculator and then putting the values into Excel that they calculated. Am I getting this correct?
That's what he just wrote. Yeah.
Okay.
What a world.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Anything coming up this week or next? I know we talked about day-to-day taxes. What, for the audience who doesn't know, what is day-to-day taxes?
It is a day that is fully dedicated to data. So it's a Saturday in Austin, Texas, and this year it is January 27th.
Yeah, 27th. Yep.
Yeah.
All day. Yeah. So it's a good one. I think we describe it as a party that masquerades as a conference. And so if you ever wanted to get together with your favorite data nerds for a weekend and look at, go to some cool talks, meet some cool people, throw back a drink or 15 with them, you can do that. So we'll be organizing the closing town hall event. We came up with this last year. Actually, it was pretty funny. We were supposed to give a talk actually on fundamentals of data engineering, you and me, but then we're like, they had an open bar right outside of there at the same time. I think Matt and I were sitting there like, okay, so
like, what are we doing here? Yeah,
we're not going to give a talk, and people are used to being talked at, but if people are having drinks, like, why don't we just get a bunch of people who are drinking and let's have a town hall discussion about various topics in data? And it was a hit. It was crazy. The people who were there was kind of the who's who of the data world, and I think it was a great conversation. I mean, Bill Inman was sitting next to Zhamak Dehghani, for example, and like two powerhouses, and the whole room was like that, right? And I think that was a great discussion. So I guess we're invited back again to do it again. So
no, looking forward to it, and thank you to Lynn Bender for the invitation. Really excited to be there this year and to see a lot of people, and it's going to be a great opportunity to connect. Some people I haven't seen for at least a year, or some people I've never met. I look forward to meeting you.
Good food in Austin too. I think if I lived in that city, I would become like 500 pounds. So that's
you'd be eating a lot of barbecue, you're saying?
Oh yeah. Somebody asked for my SoundCloud. I'm going to put it on the comments there, so you can.
Let's put a link to Day-to-Day Texas as well.
Oh yeah, we should do that too, huh?
Hold on, let me find that.
Okay, you can find that. Yeah. Sorry, it's just turning to kind of Wayne's World, but this is how the show started too. It was pretty much, like I said, just Matt and me dorking around.
We want to keep some access cable, like an access cable vibe going here if possible.
Well, the thing I don't like about a lot of shows is that they're too polished, right? And so we got to let everybody down by our super low production quality.
That
went up to YouTube. Let me just put this on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, did it not go to LinkedIn? Okay.
1 second, I'll put it in. But yeah, if you want to go, show up. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Guarantee you. well, can't guarantee anything actually, but you'll have a lot of fun, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I think so.
Unless you're the kind of person that doesn't have any fun, then that's up to you. So anyway, that's day-to-day Texas. And then Skid, that's available. Just put stuff up there for that. Skid. Skiers and data. That's gonna be a fun one too. I think everyone should show up to that, because everyone should just go to Europe for a weekend, and because you can. I'm kidding.
Well, especially if you're in Europe, if you live there, then just show up, get a ticket. And
there's a lot of people that live in Europe, Matt.
Yeah.
Burnaby is kind of a small town, so
yeah.
But anyway,
we'll overwhelm it. Yes.
Yes, who will? But just in the nerdiest group Burnaby has ever seen. Well, awesome. Anything you want to announce or talk about?
That's it for now.
That's it for now.
So
cool.
Just those
I have actually I'll have some articles coming out this week, I believe, on practicaldatamodeling.substack.
Nice.
This is where I'm launching my new book, by the way.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. A lot of people are looking forward to it. The amount of signups in this has been ridiculous. So
cool.
Better be good.
Yeah.
What are we up to? Yeah, several thousand signups at this point. So it's cool. It's cool to see. There's not even a real article on it yet. So
nice. Well, there will be soon. There
will be soon. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks to the audience. It's always good chatting with people. I know we went a bit over, and but like I said, Matt, I could keep talking all day.
But we'll spare you. Yeah,
we'll spare you that agony. It's like being waterboarded. So,
they're still here. We'll give them a break, and they can come back next week.
Yeah, next week you have I think it's Dave Langer's on next week. Let me check.
Oh yeah.
He's fun. Fantastic. So if you're into Excel, Python, all that sort of stuff. If you're into a good wholesome guy, Dave is your guest. He's amazing. So we got Dave. Then who else we got on the show after that? We got I think Ben Stansel's on after that.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah. Dave Langer, then Ben Stansel, and then Michel Tricot from Airbytes on. So stacked roster. Looking forward to it. So sick. All right, man. Have a good day.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Take care.